Eagles to another edition of TradeCat special guest exclusive podcast right here on the TradeCatKnight.org website. Folks, it is April the 3rd, 2020. I hope you all are having a very wonderful and blessed day. As always, we continue to keep the podcasting moving along, folks, this afternoon with someone who's gracious enough to take time out of his very busy schedule to help break things down on the Planet X / Earth changes level. We've got an awful lot to discuss today, whether we're discussing the coronavirus, pestilences, economic collapse, police state. We got to get to Gill's big summer date here, July the 20th, what it all means, a surge in birth pains, and then a kind of cooling down period. Listen, Gill and I have both been saying this now for quite some time, that martial law would have to be in place before some of these really crazy earth changes are coming. I get the feeling that summer is going to be quite interesting, to say the least, for a wide variety of reasons. But listen, if you haven't been to Gill's work yet, get over to his Facebook page. Simply search his name, Gill Broussard. I'm not sure, he might be maxed out on friends, but maybe you can still follow him in private message there. Twitter page is Planet 7X, so at Planet 7X, and then also his YouTube channel as well, Planet 7X, and then also his hopefully his website is still working. I know some months ago it wasn't working, they were censoring him. Planet7x.net. Gill, I have no idea where you'd like to begin. There's so much to discuss. I mean, it's been a month since you've been on the program, but since then coronavirus has stepped onto the scene, and seemingly on every level things are starting to become unhinged, right? Economically, socially, politically. Just going to hand it over to you and just break this all down.
Yes, I had said all the way back to 2016 when that was the first lineup for the moon at the foot of Virgo. There was 2 years that greatly concerned me, which was 2016 and 2021. I said that before this planet arrives, you would see troops in the streets, you see rationing of fuel and food, and probably money at the banks. And we're at these stages, or they're just about, you can see some of this happening in other countries. I don't think food would be too much of an issue here in the U.S. because we produce a lot of it. But many other countries, it'll be a major issue. And yeah, things are getting, it looks like CO3 and 4 are have at least 3 have started, and possibly 4 here. There's an event that the president is talking about, that there's some sort of operation that's going down here for the next 15 days from the first 15 days of April.
Tell us about that. Do you have any insights to that?
Well, yeah, there's a number of boats, swarms of boats, which the president is saying it's drugs, the drug cartels, which it is, which could be a lot more than just drugs coming in. It's probably trained troops. Over 20 years ago, they sent 200,000 Palestinians to Central America, to Guatemala, and so on. The globalists, they've been living there for over 20 years. They've had kids, and they speak fluent Spanish, and they're trained as soldiers. Then that ain't counting the cartels members and MS-13 and everyone else, and they're trying to land boats here on our shores between the West Coast and the Gulf Coast, and also coming off of the Caribbean islands onto Florida to create havoc. And Trump has the Navy out there, the Navy and the Air Force, and he has the U.S. Army on the shore line ready to take them on. And there may be some terrorist groups within our nation that may be implementing their plan. We don't know, but Trump gave a clear warning to Mr. Iran not to implement their plan. There was some suggestion that it may hit some of our troops overseas, but I think he made it clear as American assets. That can also include here. So There's some sort of operation happening.
Now, where along the timeline do you see a war happening, if it's on your timeline, to get us caught up to speed? I know something that caught my eye was a couple of days ago, if not yesterday, Trump tweeting out on his Twitter page, Iran might do something to Iraq. If that happens, we might have to do something to Iran. Could this lead to full-scale war, considering Russia and China are on the other side of the fence, so to speak, geopolitically speaking? Talk to us a little bit more on that level, maybe the war aspect, and maybe even the civil unrest, which could be happening soon as a result of these lockdowns. People are starting to go stir crazy, as you know, Gill. They don't like to be caged in their homes for too long.
Yeah, this is the best, for them to stay home during this time of basically attacks that may happen. Remember that the few terrorists that happened before about suicide bombers would pick mass gatherings to do their dirty deeds. I think there's a reason why he's making sure that people are at home at the moment, because it gives him hardly any targets to try to get the public. So this is the best time for him to take them on. And I think the globalists don't have much of a choice. They're going to go forward with the war, because he's fixing to pretty much hit them hard, I believe, with the sex trafficking and the seizure of assets that they've accumulated. It goes on and on, plus treasonous acts. They have undermined multiple countries with their putting politicians in there who are globalists. You can see terrible effects of this in Europe, as well as over the past years here in the U.S. And now it's coming to a head. So it's now it's time for them to pay the piper, per se. They don't want to get punished, but so that's probably going to lead to war in the Persian Gulf, and that's going to be extremely bad. Many Asian countries have stockpiled a little bit of oil, probably maybe a month or so, because but when that war starts, there's not going to be any shipment of oil coming out with rockets flying. So, and if it goes beyond a month, Asia is in serious trouble. You're looking at, even if they could get resources from other places, they could only get maybe 20% of their oil. So you're looking at the major cities of Asia, at least in China, probably not Japan. Japan could probably get enough oil from California or through the Panama. But a lot of these countries and cities are going to be collapsing or having extreme severe problems. Keep in mind that if they can't get fuel, then they can't make fertilizer. Remember, oil is going to jump up to maybe $200, $250 a barrel. So it would be too expensive to make fertilizer. And then they won't have the fuel to transport the food. And large cities depend on that heavily. So it's not going to be, you're looking at massive starvation in a large part of Asia. And that's over 50% of the world population right there. So the Bible talks about 1/4 of the world population dying between war, pestilence, drought, famine, all of these things, locusts attacking the food, quakes, tidal waves, whatever. You're going to see 1/4 of the world population getting trimmed there between this March and next.
Wow.
We're right on the edge of this happening. We're right on the edge.
Now, talk to us more about this July 20th date for those who are new to my work, who there in return would be familiar with your work, perhaps, if they haven't seen your work already. As a result of this coronavirus, I've had a lot more people coming to my website, having more time on their hands with these lockdowns. So talk to us about this summer date of July the 20th, why it's significant. Can we be seeing a big surge of quakes to come here in the summer? And if that is the case, it would only parlay into the reality of how the police state, if you will, or more boots on the street, would be all the more prevalent leading up to that time, meaning this will continue on, lockdowns, more and more National Guard on the street, all the way up till July 20th, right? If I understand you correctly.
Yes, yes. Matter of fact, we should start to see, because if we look at the Asian data, this is what was able to convince me that Planet X was actually real. Was finding my own data of records in the past, and you have three countries mainly, China, Korea, and Japan, where the emperor's astronomers, that's roughly maybe 20 or so astronomers per emperor, documented this object in 1054. And they didn't have a telescope yet. It wasn't invented yet. This is naked eye observation. They saw it for 26 months, 13 months coming in, 13 months leaving. Well, if you know anything about astronomy, the visual perspective tells us, looking at something that far away, it had to be a planet-sized object approaching us for them to see it for that length. Average comet is only for a couple weeks. Okay. So and then looking at the data, we were able to establish its orbit, which is on the ecliptic as it circles the sun, and then it comes back around. And this is the same model we're using today and over the last years. In the years past, we were able to predict when the lineup happened that we would see a massive surge in quakes and volcanic activity coming up to this date. And that's exactly what we saw. And then when Earth gets on the backside of the sun, lining up with it, there's a calm period. And that's what we saw last year.
Mm.
So right now we're coming back around to the other half, and that lineup is July 20th, where we should see a major peak, and it's going to run up to that date. You think things are coming, unhinged here at one point, but as soon as it reaches that point within a day or two, then it's going to start dropping off dramatically, calming down again. So I'm just anybody that lives in a structure that's not safe definitely shouldn't be in that structure.
You know what I've also noticed too. A lot of the National Guard. At least my home state is from New Jersey. They're on like full martial law lockdown, essentially a soft martial law. No, can't go out after 8 p.m. I've got friends still there. What I've also noticed is a lot of the coastline areas got the National Guard there. They're on lockdown. And according to our model, it's not safe to be on any coastline. I know you've been reiterating this as well. It all parlaying into the bigger picture of these really insane earth changes to come, which I've been warning about, in our traditional Catholic community. It's foretold in the Bible. It's foretold, to Catholic mystic Marie-Julie Jeheni. But the question I have for you is this. Why are so many people still resisting the notion of something out there that might be affecting the sun and just in general would be affecting us? I'm going to share with you a story now, Gill. Actually, I have not released this to my own listeners yet. I got into it about 4 days ago with Jake over at GSM. Everyone knows Grand Solar Minimum Channel. Well, he was being a little bit of a donkey's ass to me, and I was trying to figure out why. Because he came on my program, I thought we had a pretty good talk, Gill. He obviously is covering Earth changes and shortages or whatnot. But he told me, he said, "Listen, I'm not coming back on your show because you're a fraud because you talk about Planet X." And then I had to go into how in Scripture it's in, talked about. It's in Catholic prophecy or whatnot, and we got into it quite a bit. I mean, I gave him an earful, and I said, "You know what? You're not welcome back on the show." But how do you respond to people like this who are quote unquote earth changes experts who won't even acknowledge a thesis? They still think it's comical to ascertain that there might be something out there that's affecting us. I just don't get it.
I came from the group that was a hardened skeptic. So when people would first ask me, "Is this real?" and And is it biblical? I would answer with an off-the-cuff answer saying no, it's not. I doubt if there's any actual data for such a thing. And after I got off the phone, I did my search. And that led me to almost a 5-year study of finding data, compiling actual white paper reports, scientific peer review papers, running the models, looking at the biblical stories, which are not stories, they're eyewitness accounts of real events.
Mm-hmm.
It got to where I had no longer a footing to be a skeptic. There was actual hard evidence out there, and that's what I present. There is a lot of fake stuff, and I can see why people would be skeptic. There is so much fake stuff on this inbound planet that makes no astronomical sense whatsoever, and I have no data to actually back it up. But yet they run these stories up, like, oh, this is a mini solar system, and all. No. Oh, this is a brown dwarf sun. What's your data? Don't have it. Okay. This is more, according to the data that I found, this is like a planet-sized comet. It may have some orbital bodies around it. We don't know, which would be moons, not planets. Okay, it's not a solar system. It has a tail. The tail is not ice particles like the present astronomy stating a comet is. A comet is, the physicists are more correct, the tail of a comet is plasma. And that changes everything. The universe is electrical, is a electrical system. It's ruled by magnetic forces, not gravity. Gravity is a weaker force. The physicists are much more correct with the model, because when you apply their model versus the astronomy model to the data, all of the stories of the Bible come true. They're eyewitness accounts in the correct order that they are giving us the information. You cannot guess this accurately without being in the event, because they had no knowledge of the science. It's impossible. And we have artifacts that confirm the dates. It gives us the exact dates of when these things happen. I show the artifacts, I show the models, and I show the scripture, and I show the same model that was developed from the Asian records. And that's what science is in Mr. Astronomy. If you can take data, it's observed phenomenon, bring it into the laboratory, which is software basically for astronomy, and reproduce the model and prove it out, that's called science. Well, we have 14 of these events in the biblical records. That goes along with the artifacts that gives us the date, the star pattern. It's like a Swiss watch. If you look at the stars and where the planets are and the moons and everything, it gives you the exact date up to 2 hours of when the event happened on some of these. On and on and on. Yeah. It took that type of evidence to convince me to move my position from a skeptic to a firm believer that this object is real. Now the question is, when is it arriving?
Yeah, that was my next question. When do you? I mean, is it possible we see it for the first time this summer? I know you've been pretty outspoken against claims. I mean, I bring on Marshall Masters every month. He thinks he's seen it already. I know you don't believe that, but I mean, when could we see it with the naked eye? Are we saying this summer?
Yeah, Marshall Masters has been seeing it since when? In later 2000 or more or earlier. No, there is no valid sighting in the public realm. Remember, we have 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers. They would love to use their equipment to take pictures of it, especially to be the first one to see it, and to put it out in the public. That's why they have to control the internet. The internet will have to go down at one given point until they have full control under martial law. Martial law, remember, one of the rules of the martial law, you cannot cause a panic. Otherwise, you're thrown in jail. So that's where the amateur astronomers are caught within the law. Right now, they have freedom of speech. Okay, but once martial law is implemented, no, you cannot cause a panic of any type. So people are on their own to be looking for this, and I've given data. I show them where to look in the sky between Sagittarius and Capricorn on the ecliptic, and the Asian saw it for 13 months. The Bible alludes that we will have a short sighting. We won't have the normal sighting. They have some way of ability to cloak it, to block our view, and we will have only a short sighting. So the last day of February was the window all the way up to next March. The end of March is the approach phase of 13 months that the Asian astronomers saw it. So if we have a late sighting, I would expect maybe August and September. Be aware, you look south in the sky between Sagittarius and Capricorn about midnight, looking south. If you're in the northern hemisphere, if you're in the southern if you're in the southern hemisphere, you're looking north. This is what we're waiting on, and the only thing that gives us this date, which is not in astronomy records per se, it's in the biblical astronomy records. They're saying the moon has to be at the foot of Virgo, the woman. Well, obviously, if you're looking at the moon, you're looking at the star, you're looking at the nighttime sky. And that is a rare event for the moon to be right at the foot of Virgo. There's only 2 years that I was able to find that, because it has an entry and an exit. The moon is on a tilted orbit. So it crosses it twice. That's 2016 and 2021. March 30th to 31st of 2021 will be another time where the moon is at the foot of Virgo. So that window of looking for it is 13 months prior to that. And since we'll have a short window, I think at least half of that time frame is when we're going to be seeing it. So I would be very attentive on August and September, and when everything else is going on the ground and your attention is focused on what's going on around you, that's when you start looking up. Okay.
Yeah. Now I know you said briefly you didn't want to make any major prognostications, but again, for those who are new to my work, if you will, what's your prognostic? Just in general with Yellowstone, we had that swarm of quakes out there in Nevada, 6.5. The West Coast has been rattling. I know Michael Snyder's been reporting upon that. By the way, we get Michael Snyder back on the program for the first time after about a year in April as well, from the Economic Collapse blog. It doesn't look too good. If indeed this thing is inbound, it would only make sense that this thing does pop off, perhaps. And then what happens then? To our agriculture, to our economy, to the people's psyche, mental state. Forget about lockdown. That would be something really major. But what are you looking at with Yellowstone?
The Bible talks about a major quake at the time that this thing arrives. It's a major quake that shakes the entire earth. If a supervolcano were to go off, it would do the very similar thing. So I'm expecting it closer to its arrival. You're gonna have a lot of earth pre-signs of its erupting before that, and they're going to get a lot more intense, especially around July 20th, probably. The Bible talks about a remnant of the lost tribes making it back to Israel. That has to happen, and that starts the last 2 weeks of September to be in Israel for Sukkot. That the 1st of October, flu season starts. If you try to make your trip to Jerusalem past October 1st, you'll probably have a very difficult time getting in. And the Bible says that. If you understand where it says, don't make your trip in the winter, remember where it says that? It says not to make your trip in the winter to Jerusalem. Well, I have a problem with that, because I've studied ancient and Paleo-Hebrew, the customs of the Hebrews and everything. They only had 2 seasons, hot and cold. The Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans had 4 seasons. And there is enough Hebrew left into the text that the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew. I know that's counter to what some of the religious authorities are saying, but they're trying to move you away. They're trying to de-Hebraize the text. They're trying to remove any hint of. That's why they changed all of the names to Greek. Well, the Hebrews weren't Greek. The apostles were Hebrews. They had, like John, his actual name was Yochanan, and so on and so on. When you go back to that, then that's not winter. Winter is only 3 months. He's actually talking about don't make your trip in the last 6 months, because there's only 2 seasons to most of the cultures of that time period. Only had 2 seasons. That brings you all the way to Sukkot. From Passover to Sukkot. Passover's going to be in March, coming up in 2000. You back it up, that brings it to 2020.
Now, I don't mean to cut you off, but what do you make of all of these rabbis indicating that the Messiah is here? What do you take away from it? I mean, obviously we know we're not talking about our Jesus. What does that mean to you? What does that mean in Gill Broussard's world? We have some of these top rabbis saying, like Rabbi Lippo, that the Messiah will save us from the coronavirus. We need our King of Jerusalem or whatnot. We need some of the top rabbis have said they've already met the Messiah. They've been talking to him. What do you make of that?
There's only one that I know that probably talked to him, and he was scorned. That was Rabbi Kaduri. He wrote it in a coded message for his son to read 1 year after he was already buried, because he knew if he would read the letter, and it wouldn't have been a year, they would have pulled him out the ground. So after a year, they don't touch it. There's a law or whatever, and he spells out Yeshua's name. So even though he was the most popular rabbi, after that, his name was almost blotted out. And you can find books on this. Well, I don't think the ones who try to blot out his name is actually seeing the true Messiah. Remember, they're trying to guess with the date. Some of them are saying that the Messiah was going to show up this Passover that is starting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before Passover. Yeah, some of them were saying that. Yeah.
There's other rabbis said that their Messiah will show up the last day of Sukkot, which that's when I expect the Antichrist to show up to negotiate the peace deal.
Yeah, that's where I was heading with all this. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
It's going to take him 4 months or so, 4 to 5 months, to negotiate the peace deal before it's signed, which is going to be signed very close to the 40-day warning. Just like Jonah, the world's going to have a 40-day warning. That's when they're going to tell the world this comet that's rounding the sun, because the data right there, that 40-day mark, is actually where it's at perihelion. It's right behind the sun rounding it. And how did they know that? That it was 40 days before it reached us.
That's very interesting. I mean to cut you off too as well. This is amazing that you're saying this. And again, I don't know if we're talking same language here, but within our Catholic community, there was one mystic that actually warned us of Planet X, Marie Julie Jahani. She said there would be a 2 days of darkness that would precede the 3 days of darkness, which would be, if I'm not mistaken, a 40-day interval that people would just know that it was going to be close. Again, I don't know if we're talking the same thing, but basically that number was used the same. And again, 40 is a very interesting number, of course. More or less talking to a transitory period, moving from point A to point B, more or less. But wow, I mean, as you said, that just struck me. I was like, wow, okay, this one particular mystic said. Keep in mind
that it's not going to be scary viewing this, because you're actually, the distance is from here to the sun is like 93 million miles. Okay, so it's not going to be scary, not until it gets to the last couple of weeks of its approach. Remember, for it to visually double from our view, it has to cover half that distance. So it has to travel from the sun half of 93 million miles just to double in our view. Now, then after that, it just travels a quarter of the distance and it doubled. Then an eighth. So the last 2 weeks is where it really gets large and scary. And that's when the public will start to panic. Okay, because whenever they hear this, they're not going to be panicking. It's just like a hurricane. People don't panic till the last 3 to 4 days of its approach.
Yeah,
they don't prepare a week or 2 weeks ahead of time. Only the smarter people do.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Only the smarter people.
All right. But the general public, they always think too late and they think in masses. And that's when the shelves get empty. We saw that just
Oh
recently.
yeah. Toilet paper wars. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even other food products, especially in other countries where the virus was hitting harder. Well, the Bible already tells us there's going to be a shortage of food on certain areas. We're going to go through plagues. Plagues is plural. Now, keep in mind of that time period, plagues meant more than just viruses. That's anything that really affects your food production.
Locusts.
It
Yeah.
could be locusts.
Hmm.
It could be disease, a fungus on it could be anything that's destroying your food or that's a negative impact on the people is considered a plague if it's across the board. So you got to go with the context of the words of the time period that the book was written in. Same thing with looking at the Asian records. You have to have a certain knowledge of their language. And like in Asian, a comet was called a fiery dragon.
Hmm.
Well, guess what? Israel is in Asia. It's in the Asian continent. Where does that say that? It says it in the Bible. Fiery dragon of old.
Yeah, it's very interesting to say the least, Gil. So much to consider. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time. Our talks always go so fast here. Again, with Gill Broussard. But yes, pestilences, economic collapse, plagues, war, civil unrest, police state being unveiled. We're probably going to see some pretty insane earth changes this summer. And again, we're all parlaying into the bigger picture of what seemingly will be the Antichrist arriving onto the scene in a not so distant future. Gil, I'll leave you with some parting words here, and then we'll leave you with some shameless self promotion time. We already have Gil scheduled for next month. As you know, we try to stay a month ahead in advance, so we're gracious that Gil will be coming back to us. But parting words, Gil, shameless self promotion time, and then we'll close out the show.
If I'm correct, that I'm saying, look, I can't give a definite that it's going to show up in March because we have to have visual confirmation for the year, and that's what we're looking for. But by the time that comes around, probably the internet is going to be down. We may not get our next interview. We may or we may not. We're that close to the time.
Hmm.
Your viewers need to be able to download the guidelines that I've given them on where to look, and be attentive when everything is happening around you and your focus is everything around. Start looking up and see if you can see a regular comet. It's going to look like a comet. It's not going to be. It has to be on the ecliptic, and it has to be in between Sagittarius and Capricorn for 2 or 3 months there. It has to be in that area
Hmm.
before it comes out, and it's going to do a retrograde motion. It's going to go backwards and everything. So that tells you that you need to be in Jerusalem for Sukkot, which is October 1st, because that's one of the safest places to be. The pivot point of Earth's tilt is around that region. That means it has the least effects. And that's also the Messiah comes mid of night in Jerusalem. And before he arrives, the two witnesses arrive. And before the two witnesses arrive, the Antichrist arrives. And that's all in Jerusalem. If you want to be in the center of watching this, that's where the front seat is.
Yeah, very interesting times we live in. Gill Broussard from Planet 7X. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the program, you can find him on Facebook. Just search his name, Gill Broussard. His Twitter page is at Planet 7X. You can also find his YouTube channel. Just simply search his name. It will pop up as well. And then the website is planet7x.net. And again, I wish more and more people would wake up to the reality that we are dealing with something out there. People like Jake over at Grand Solar Minimum thinks people like Gill and I are fakes and frauds or whatnot would wake up, because this is going to be something beyond our wildest beyond our wildest imagination, as far as I'm concerned. And according with Catholic prophecy, we're going to see earth changes, folks, that we have just with whole countries being swallowed up, according to some prophecies. This is going to be insane at a certain point. Again, I'm not suggesting over the next year that might happen, but who knows? We've got to keep our eyes to the skies, as Father Malachi Martin has said, as Gill Broussard is saying. Folks, thank you all for tuning in to TradeCatKnight, special guest exclusive podcast for this April the 3rd, 2020. Until next time, stay safe and God bless.